What is the creepiest thing that has happened to you in the woods? Be in the middle of the Australian bush, at least 50 kilometers from any civilization or human. I'm hunting with my brother, and we're startled by what seems to be a perfectly clean and unused oven. Just sitting there, no dust, nothing. It even still had warranty tags hanging off it and everything. We just continued on our way, feeling confused and weirded out.
That's a strange find. You're out in the middle of nowhere, and there's this pristine oven just sitting there. Makes you wonder who put it there and why. It's almost like a scene from a horror movie. Just hoping you didn't trip over any other bizarre things as you continued your hunt. Sometimes you come across stuff that doesn't fit the environment, and it sticks with you. Just a weird moment, I guess.
Not all creepy, but the strangest thing that happened to me in the woods was when my friends and I were mountain biking. We had to stop to throw our bikes over a washout. It was about 3 feet across and a 10-foot drop, so not very dangerous. As we were about to throw our bikes across the gap, a group of 10 guys dressed as ninjas appeared on the other side. They all hopped the gap and ran by without word. This happened in Alabama during the mid-90s. My friends and I laughed. We realized soon after that they were today's equivalent of LARPers. Not a threatening situation at all, but very strange and hilarious.
That's wild. Just imagine stopping to do something normal and a group of ninjas shows up. It's the kind of thing you wouldn't believe unless you saw it. LARPers in the woods, just going about their day. It's funny how unexpected moments turn into memorable stories. I bet you guys laughed about that for ages. Strange, but definitely one of those unique experiences that stick with you.
Not really creepy or strange, but when I was like 10 or so, my family was out picking lingonberries and stuff, and I was sitting alone in our camp, still having my snack. Suddenly, a freaking female elk comes running out of the tree line. We were like up on a mountain. My hometown is kind of surrounded by smaller mountains, and it was heading straight for me. The thicket wasn't more than about 15 meters away. Then it veered off in 90 degrees just as suddenly and ran back into the thick in seconds after I saw a male running after her in there. Almost got run over by horny elks.
That's an interesting story. Running into wildlife like that can be a bit unexpected. I can imagine sitting there and suddenly seeing an elk charging towards you. It's kind of wild to think about how nature just plays out around us without warning. I've had my fair share of close encounters, too. Just a reminder that even in the most chill situations, things can get a little hectic. Glad you were okay.
When I lived in North Vancouver, my home was in a forest on a mountain. I saw a shadow of a figure passing my window in the middle of the night. It made some noise, but not enough to fully wake me up. The next morning, I found my backyard to be completely ruined. There was trash everywhere, and my wooden fence looked like a tank drove over it. There were deep indentations in the grass. It left a trail that carried on to the neighbor's yard. Later that day, the news reported that a bear was wild in my area and to remain cautious when outdoors. It's not too unusual, especially for Vancouver, but it's the creepiest thing I've experienced in a forest.
That sounds pretty intense. Living in a forest can be a bit eerie sometimes. The shadow must have been unsettling, especially not knowing what it was at first. Waking up to a wrecked yard and finding out it was a bear is kind of wild. You hear about bears showing up, but to see the aftermath like that really hits home. It's definitely an experience you don't forget easily. Nature can be unpredictable.
The local airport asked us to go check a wooded area in town because someone was pointing lasers at their planes, obstructing their vision to land. We go check it out, get deep in the woods, and at the end of the path is a tree. At the top of the tree was glowing red eyes. Freaked us out, but whatever. Then every few seconds the eyes would move a few feet down the tree, constantly pointed in our direction and making no noise. Once it got halfway down, we were like, EFF this, and took off. Whatever it was inching its way down to come check us out, and I wasn't waiting around to find out what it was. Never caught the laser bandits. Heck, maybe it was old Red Eyes, who knows.
That's a wild story. Just chilling in the woods and then seeing glowing eyes would definitely freak anyone out. I can't blame you for leaving. Sometimes it's better not to find out what's lurking. Plus, it's strange that the laser guys were never caught. Maybe they had help from whatever was in that tree. It's one of those things that sticks with you, even if you try to shake it off.
I was coming out of the woods in the dark. I think it was just before hunting season because acorns were just starting to drop. When the acorns fall, they can startle you. Sometimes it's louder than you would expect. However, as I was about 100 yards from the main trail, and there was a loud thud which I also fell under my feet. By sound and feel, it seemed like someone had dropped a boulder about 3 feet at my 8 o'clock. I immediately whipped around and shined my headlight on the spot. Absolutely nothing. It sure as shit was not an acorn. Animals do creepy shit all the time, but you can always chalk up a rustle in the bushes or some eyes glowing in the dark to critters. I'm a logical person and don't really buy into ghost stories or what have you, but to this day, I have no plausible explanation to what the hell that noise was.
That sounds pretty eerie. It's always unsettling when you hear something that just doesn't add up, especially in the dark woods. You expect noises, but that thud must have really caught you off guard. It's interesting how we try to rationalize these moments, yet some things just leave us with questions. Those experiences really stick with you, even if you lean more towards logic. Sounds like a mystery you'll always wonder about.
I was turkey hunting with my dad several years ago, and we were sitting in a blind. If I remember correctly, it was not an enclosed blind, and the backside of it was open. For those of you that don't know, a hunting blind is basically a little shack that you sit in to hunt. Well, we had got out there when it was still pitch black, probably about 4 a.m., and the only light while sitting in the blind was the moonlight. My dad proceeds to tell me to be quiet and listen, and I could hear rustling about 10 feet for the blind in front of us. Definitely wasn't a turkey, but some other larger animal. I couldn't see it, but he told me it was a deer. It does whatever it's doing and then goes away. Several hours later, he tells me, "Oh, by the way, that wasn't a deer. That was definitely a bear." Thanks, Dad. Wasn't really anything we could do but to sit and let it pass, but it would have been nice to know that while we were walking out, so I could keep my eyes open for one.
That's a pretty chill story. Just sitting in the blind, waiting for turkeys, and then realizing a bear was nearby. Your dad's timing with that info is classic. It's like he held that back just to keep things interesting. I guess sitting still was the right move, though. Better to know after the fact than to freak out while it was happening. Sounds like a memorable trip.
A few years back, my buddy and I had decided to go camping out in Uhori National Forest. Normally we stay pretty close to the primitive camping areas, but we decided that we wanted to hike deep into the woods to be away from everyone. It was about midnight when we were walking through the woods. Where we were, there shouldn't have been anyone out that far. As we were walking, I heard what sounded like someone walking toward us. It was so dark, all I could do was scan the area with my headlamp. We both started freaking out a bit and had our pistols out at this point. Then we hear someone yell, "Don't move, we're coming out." All of a sudden, a bunch of soldiers come out of nowhere. We were completely surrounded and had no idea they were even there. Turns out Army Special Forces was running a training exercise, and we walked right into the middle of it. We all laughed about it. They checked to make sure we knew our location, and then they moved on. Probably the scariest, coolest thing that's ever happened to me.
That sounds pretty intense. I can imagine how the tension built when you heard someone approaching at night. It's wild to think you stumbled into a Special Forces training. I guess that's what happens when you go off the beaten path. At least it ended well, and you got a pretty unique story out of it. Not many people can say they camped near soldiers in training.
Went hiking on a mountain in southern VA with my cousins, and seeing as I was in rather poor shape, I was in the back of the pack the whole time. We were the last group to leave as we went in the afternoon. Walking back down, I could have sworn I heard footsteps behind me. We get back, and the first thing I see is a missing person thing for a young couple that was found murdered on the trail.
That's a pretty unsettling experience. Hiking with your cousins and feeling out of shape is one thing, but hearing footsteps, that's creepy. Finding out later about the missing couple adds a whole layer of tension. It's strange how quickly a fun outing can turn into something else entirely. Definitely makes you think twice about the places you go, and what might have happened there before.
I was camping in the woods next to where a guy had hung himself. When my girlfriend told me about it, I thought she was just trying to scare me, so I stuck the middle finger up at the tree. Then we go over to the tree, and there's a memorial with candles and pictures. So we have our tent set up, and our dog is with us. It's late at night, and my girlfriend is fast asleep, and I can't get to sleep. Then I hear footsteps outside the tent. I thought I was just imagining it until my dog started growling. Then I try to ignore it and get back to sleep, and all of a sudden I fold over and can't breathe for a few seconds. My legs were pushed right against my chest in the sleeping bag. I was proper folded over, and then I was released. It was fucking terrifying. But I think the folding over part was just a very realistic dream. Well, that's what I tell myself at least.
That sounds pretty unsettling. Camping next to a spot like that seems like a bad idea. The footsteps and your dog growling would freak anyone out. It's easy to brush things off as imagination until something feels really real. The folding over part is especially creepy, whether it was a dream or something else. At least you made it through the night. It's one of those stories you don't forget.
I used to live in a house with a 14-acre patch of woods behind it. Once my brother and I found an extremely ragged tent in the middle of those woods. There was no one inside at the time, but it was littered with old clothing, trash, empty cans, and old shoe. There was also a dirty air mattress, and for some reason, it had a broken TV in it, one of those old ones with antennas. We figured a homeless person was living in the woods, and our mom wouldn't allow us to go in the woods for a while after that, although the tent disappeared some days later. As children, we were creeped out, but in hindsight, I guess it's more weird than creepy.
That sounds like an interesting childhood memory. Finding something unusual like that can really stick with you. It's crazy to think about who might have been there before and what their story was. I get why your mom would have been concerned, but it does make for a strange and memorable experience looking back. Nature can have its surprises, and it's cool you got to explore that.
A friend and I were messing around an old abandoned 100-year-old farmhouse out in the woods, and afterwards we're walking down the gravel road out in the middle of nowhere. I looked behind us, and a guy in a hockey mask was behind us and chased us all the way down the road until we heard him yell for us to stop. Turns out it was my brother-in-law who'd followed us and thought it would be funny to scare the shit out of us.
That's a classic brother-in-law move. We all have that one relative who just loves to mess with us. The setting makes it even better, an old farmhouse in the woods and then a dude in a hockey mask? Sounds like a scene from a low-budget horror movie. At least it ended with a laugh, but I bet the adrenaline rush was real. You definitely won't forget that walk down the road.
Happened to my friends, not me, thank God. But there's a rarely used mountain road my friends would drive up, pull off, and smoke weed under the stars. So one night, they're up there passing the bowl and standing in a circle, and in the flare of the lighter, they realize there's an extra person just chilling in the circle. Turns out he was camping with some of his friends, was also stoned, saw the flare of the lighter, and decided to go hang with my friends. He just forgot to introduce himself or announce his presence.
That's kind of wild. Just some random guy creeping into their circle. I guess the stone vibe makes it easier to just roll with it. They probably just accepted him as part of the gang for the night. I can imagine the surprise when they noticed. At least it didn't turn weird, just some chill moments under the stars. Funny how things can happen like that in the moment.
There's an area in the woods behind our house I cannot walk through. When I try to, my hearing goes away and I start to feel like I will pass out, as well as getting immense pressure in my chest. That particular area always looks darker than the rest of the woods, and a lot of the foliage there is dead. The 2 times I try to look around, I cut my leg open and cannot remember why.
That's interesting. It sounds like there's something off about that area in the woods. The feeling of pressure and losing your hearing is pretty unsettling. It's strange how some places can have such a heavy vibe. And cutting your leg both times adds a creepy layer to it. I can see why you wouldn't want to go back there. Some places just give off a bad energy, you know?
One time in Caryville, W.I. my friends and I went to the children's cemetery. A bunch of children were murdered in a schoolhouse in this town. Anyways, we went to this cemetery, and it was late at night, and we're walking around reading these gravestones, and a truck pulls up the road and points its lights right at us and starts revving its engine really loud and flashing its lights. We were so scared we got in our cars and started driving away. They followed us all the way out of town, speeding up next to us and almost running us off the road. Worst night ever.
That sounds intense. I can see how that kind of experience would stick with you. Being in a cemetery at night is already creepy, but then having someone follow you like that would freak anyone out. It's one of those moments you probably think about later and wonder what could have happened. Glad you all made it out safe in the end. Definitely not a night to forget.
Was a girl guide on a camping trip, about 11 years old, in a tent with 4 other girls. It was 9 p.m. or so. There was a strange noise outside our tent, then a low male voice saying something like, "Girls, you need to come out now. I've got something I need to tell you. It's Akella." Then a noise like he was touching the outside of the tent. We all fell absolutely silent and stared at each other. None of our leaders were Akella, scouts, not girl guides, and it made no sense. One of us started panicking and crying. Me and this other girl told the others we'd get help, got these safety whistles, screamed bloody murder, and ran until we found one of the leaders. Police came and brought sniffer dogs. Turned out there had been something similar reported recently. A public footpath ran right alongside the pitching area in the woods.
That sounds intense. I remember a camping trip where we had a similar scare. We heard rustling outside, and a friend thought it was a bear. She started freaking out, and we all just froze. Eventually, we realized it was just raccoons rummaging through our food. We laughed about it later, but in the moment, it felt real. It's crazy how our imaginations can run wild in the dark.
Not me, but my sister and her boyfriend. Long story short, my sister and her husband lived in southern Denmark for a while, living next to a school where her boyfriend was a teacher. Now, they had a dog they would usually take a walk in the nearby woods with. This is where things got fucked up. They see a van with an open back, parked in the middle of the woods. Moving on, a bit scared, they see 2 men walking around, one carrying a shovel, the other a black garbage bag, those that are literally person-sized, don't know what they're called in English, which appears to be full. My sister gets scared and wants to call the cops, but then the 2 men start walking towards them. My sister's boyfriend is quite a big guy, so he's ready to fight them. One of the guys then opens the bag and shouts, "Hey, you two, you want any Ramsons?" Those onion kind of thingies. Turns out they were out gathering Ramsons in the middle of the woods. Albeit illegal, they never reported them to the police, and it's been a fun story to tell at family gatherings. Laughing face.
That's wild. Your sister and her boyfriend must have been on edge there. It's funny how things can look sketchy at first but turn out to be harmless. I guess gathering Ramsons isn't something you expect to see in the woods. Good thing they didn't end up calling the cops, though. That story must make for some good laughs now. Sometimes the most unexpected moments stick with you.
I once overshot my campsite on a very little traveled trail. Saw somebody run behind a tree. Checked behind the tree, thinking it was a friend. Lo and behold, nobody was there. Awesome. So I walked the opposite direction down the trail and eventually found my camp where two of my friends were. They had just claimed they saw some people run through the dense forest faster than a human would have been able to. Later found out that we were camping in the grounds of an old town that was wiped out by smallpox in the 1800s. The town was called Pandemonium, if anybody is interested.
That's an interesting story. Getting lost while camping can be a little unsettling, especially when you think you see someone. It's kind of eerie to think about the history of that place too. It adds a whole new layer to the experience, knowing the area has such a dark past. Sometimes, those old towns can carry strange vibes. Glad you found your friends and made it back to camp.
Was hiking with my wife and her two siblings in northern Ontario in early winter. Not a big hike, just strolling along a trail near home and chatting. Suddenly, a full-size moose comes barreling around a bend in the trail at full sprint. It continues running at us for a few strides before it seems to really notice our presence and skids to a halt. I nod my head in its direction and say to my wife, "Look, a moose." She nods in agreement, and her brother responds, "Oh, shit," just as we start backing away from it. A husky comes running around the bend, also at full speed. It too continues towards us for a few strides before taking notice and skidding to a stop. The two animals stare at us. We stare back. The husky yips excitedly and does its bow and happy bounce thing before swatting at the moose with a paw, and then turns and runs back around the bend in a clear, come-get-me manner. The moose spins and chases after it. "Huh, that was weird," I say. My brother-in-law agrees, then suggests we walk the other direction, just in case.
That sounds like a pretty wild experience. I can just imagine the moment when the moose appeared out of nowhere. The confusion must have been real, especially with the husky acting like it owned the trail. It's interesting how nature can surprise you like that. Definitely a good call to head the other way afterward. Just goes to show, you never know what you're gonna run into while hiking.
I heard someone moving around outside my house at like 2 a.m. I thought it was a cat or something, so I ignored it. After about 10 minutes, I went to the front door and looked through the peephole, and I saw a man pacing back and forth across my porch. He stayed on my driveway/porch until about 4 a.m., and then got in his truck and drove away. His truck was full of garbage bags, blankets, and suitcases. I have no idea what the fuck was going through his mind.
That's pretty unsettling. Like, you hear noises at night and figure it's nothing serious. But then you see someone pacing outside your place for hours. I'd probably be curious but also a bit worried. The truck full of garbage makes it even weirder. Can't help but wonder what his deal was. Glad you didn't get involved though. Sometimes better to just watch and stay safe.
I was scouting for deer season in a national forest in Texas. I was about 2 miles from the nearest road, walking down a trail, when I happened upon a cooler just sitting there on the trail. It was a larger cooler, maybe 50 QT or so. I sat there for a minute looking around for tracks or signs of people, and found nothing. Not a single boot print or tire track around. I yelled out several times, but never got a response. I started wondering what the hell was in this cooler. Body parts, a head, dead animals, who knows. This was in deep East Texas. Well, I finally walked up to it and opened it up, and it was full of iced-down Miller Lite in cans. This was in the heat of summer, so I obliged myself. I grabbed several beers and put them in my backpack, then yelled out, "Thank for the beers." Then went on my way. Had I been Bigfoot's beer? That was the only logical conclusion I could come up with.
That's a wild story. Stumbling upon an abandoned cooler like that in the middle of nowhere must have been a trip. I can see the thoughts racing through your mind about what was inside. but finding Miller Lite instead of something creepy? That's a win. At least you got some cold drinks for the hike. Bigfoot's beer is a funny twist, though. Makes for a good tale to share later.
Was camping as a kid, sleeping next to my dad in the back of his truck that had shell on it. We stored our food in a storage bin underneath the canoe that was strapped to the top of the truck. Approximately 2 a.m., 2 grizzly bears climbed on top of the truck to rob us of our condiments and hot dog buns. Dad banged his flashlight on the side of the truck. The bears fled into the night.
That sounds intense. I remember camping trips too, though nothing that wild happened. Just the usual tents and campfire stories. Having bears around must have been an adrenaline rush. Probably a little scary at the moment, but something you'd laugh about later. Your dad handled it well. Sounds like a memorable night. Always good to have a flashlight handy in situations like that.
The woods I've been living next to since I was 5, I'm 16 now, is honestly the scariest place. A train track used to go through it, and it still has an abandoned train station. The creepiest thing is the dead animals we find. One time me and my sisters found a random slab of meat while walking to school through the woods. It remained there all through winter until the snow melted and it rotted. We saw it every day and just called it the meat. The strangest thing was that no animals seemed to want to eat it. There's a trail that goes through the forest with little lampposts on the side, and someone keeps putting pieces of dead animals on the lampposts. One time we found a deer leg, and another time we found a cat head. I have a ton of other creepy stories about this place, if anyone's interested.
That's an eerie spot you've got there. Finding that slab of meat must have been unsettling, especially since it didn't attract any animals. The dead animals on the lampposts are strange too. It sounds like the woods have their own vibe going on, one that keeps you on edge. It'd be interesting to hear more of those creepy stories. Just goes to show how nature can have its darker side.
Camping with some friends in the Appalachian Mountains. We camped where a large Civil War battle had occurred. I'm a huge skeptic and don't believe in ghosts or the afterlife. However, that night, we heard musket fire, cavalry, even a trumpet sounding. I still cannot come up with a reasonable explanation. We had been the only campers within miles.
That sounds like an eerie experience. I've camped in some historic spots too, and sometimes the setting can mess with your head. I would probably feel the same way if I heard those sounds out there in the woods. It's strange how our minds can play tricks, but it's hard to shake the thought of it being something more when you're all alone like that. You just can't ignore it.
In college, walking in the woods with a group of friends in Hicktown, Middle U.S. There was a very redneck townie. Reminded me of Tucker from Tucker and Dale versus Evil Fishing by his lonesome. Sees us, and instead of saying, "How's it going today?" he says, "You boys trying to find a place to fuck? There's a good flat area over there." Points to a flat patch of dirt 20 feet away. "Don't mind me, I'll just be over here fishing." We noped out there real fast.
That sounds like a typical day in a small town. You never know who you're gonna run into. That guy definitely had a unique way of greeting people. It's funny how you can have such random encounters that stick with you. Makes for a good story later on. I get why you all left in a hurry though. Sometimes it's best to avoid certain situations.
My girlfriend and I were in high school and went out by a river I used to live by. It had some hiking trails, but no one was out on them this day. We start kissing and getting handsy when behind her, I heard something moving through the tall grass, 5 feet high, 30 feet away. I could see the grass shifting violently, and it was loud, really loud. We booked it out of there so fast. I'm not sure what it was, if it was a person or an animal. Freaked us out though.
That sounds intense. Being out in nature can be peaceful, but sometimes it turns unpredictable. I've had moments like that too, where something unexpected happens and you just feel that rush. It's crazy how quickly the mood can change. I get why you both wanted to leave in a hurry. It's better to play it safe, especially when you're not sure what's out there.
I do a lot of solo hiking and consistently see strange staircases leading to nowhere, like they might have once been a part of a house or barn or something, but they're all that remains. I assume 100 to 200 years ago, they must have made stairs pretty sturdy, so they tend to outlast the building they're a part of. The creepy thing is no one else seems to share this experience, and I've gone on hikes with friends only to find the staircases I swore were there no longer exist. I went and climbed one a month or so ago just to prove to myself I wasn't seeing things, so they're definitely there. Ever since then, I've been obsessing over taking my friend to climb them with me, so they can see how weird these random staircases are, and more importantly, that I'm not crazy.
That sounds interesting. I've had similar experiences hiking, where I'd find old foundations or remnants of structures. It's like stepping into a different time. I brought friends along before, and they sometimes think I'm just imagining things until they see it themselves. It's nice to have that validation. Going back to those staircases to show them sounds like a good plan. Maybe they'll share in the mystery with you.
I was in college taking a botany course. We had one day in lab where we went outside to do some field work. My group decided to go into the woods for our specimen, and that's how I saw it. Someone, at least a year before, because it all and dead, took vines from all over the woods and weaved them together between about 5 trees. I'm 5 feet 3 inches, and it was nearly as tall as me. It was large enough I could climb on it and sit without any structural damage. It was about 30 foot long and was shaped to be very large and round on one end and eventually tapered off to nothing on the other. I have no doubt it was some bored students doing an art project, but the fact it was hidden in the woods along with its massive size was just creepy as could be. Total dimensions were about 5 foot tall and wide at the largest point and 30 long.
That sounds like a pretty wild discovery for a botany lab. Finding something like that in the woods could definitely catch anyone off guard. It's interesting how students sometimes create art in unexpected places. I get the creepy vibe though. Imagining a huge vine structure tucked away like that makes it feel like something straight out of a horror movie. It's a cool story, even if it's a bit unsettling.
This story is not about me, but instead my father. When he was a younger lad, he would go on crazy hiking trips with friends and cross the Canadian border through dense forests so they could all drink legally. As they hiked through the woods, they stopped by lakes and interesting areas and marked them on a map. There was one place, however, they wouldn't go back to. As the group wandered the forest, they stumbled upon a large, perfectly round clearing. Flat land, and there was no evidence of stumps, just simply low grass. My father claims that the girl who first saw it screamed and started crying. Upon closer inspection, there was a stone figure in the middle of the clearing, rounded about a level high. What sent them running, however, was the hundreds of dead animals lining the clearing. My dad claims that he doesn't know if it was some kind of satanic ritual or something. However, he has seen many other things in the woods, like little Stephen, but that story is for another time. TLDR. Father stumbles across satanic clearing lined with animal bodies.
That's a wild story. Your dad and his friends must have been freaked out when they saw that clearing. It's not every day you come across something like that in the woods. I can't imagine how unsettling it must have been to see all those dead animals. Definitely sounds like a place to avoid. It's interesting how there are so many unexplained things in nature that stick with people.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.